Enrique entered as always, smiling at no one, giving orders with the certainty that he would be obeyed. For him, it was just another night of luxury. For Clara, it was just another tough shift. But destiny has its ways. It weaves reunions when least expected, and almost always in silence. She recognized the voice before recognizing the face, and when he mocked the dish and her ability to serve, something inside her stirred. It wasn't just the offense, it was the echo. The memory of seeing her mother being treated like furniture, like someone who owed gratitude for being allowed to work. In that instant, Clara wasn't just the efficient professional, she was the daughter of the woman who had been silenced for a lifetime. And with the same serene tone she learned from her mother, she spoke, not to humiliate, but to make him remember. And what followed was a silence that no money could buy. Enrique, paralyzed, the dining room in respect, eyes attentive, because Clara didn't just defend herself, she gave voice to all the others who never could say anything. And that's how, on an ordinary night, an arrogant millionaire was silenced not by anger, but by memory. And the waitress became a symbol of something rare, dignity that survives even when everyone expects you to stay quiet. Some people believe the world is at their disposal just because they have money in their pocket and a known surname. That they can mistreat, humiliate, command, and everyone around will accept it in silence. After all, whoever pays commands. Isn't that what they say? But this story will prove that not every silence is submission. Sometimes it's just a memory waiting for the right moment to become an answer. Have you ever swallowed a scream to avoid losing your job? Have you ever stayed quiet in the face of humiliation just to keep your dignity intact? If so, then maybe you'll recognize yourself in Clara, a waitress with a serene gaze and calloused hands, who learned early that humility isn't weakness, it's contained strength. What she experienced on an ordinary work night was much more than a complicated service. It was a reunion with a past that still hurt and the breaking of a silence inherited from her mother. This story is about respect at work, about confrontation without screaming, about the voice of dignity echoing where before there was only obedience. An arrogant millionaire thought he could steamroll everything with his tone of voice, until he heard for the first time a truth that paralyzed him. And whoever spoke didn't use curse words or insults, she used memory. Here you'll understand how a brave waitress managed to teach a lesson in humility to a man who thought he could buy everything, even other people's silence. And maybe after this story, you'll also realize that the greatest form of justice isn't screaming louder, but firmly remembering who we are and who we should never have forgotten. Clara was in the middle of another busy work night when he entered. Enrique Noguera, one of those arrogant millionaires who make more noise than presence. In a well-cut suit and forced smile, he crossed the dining room as if he owned the place, snapping his fingers to get attention, as if calling a dog. Without even looking into her eyes, he fired orders with disdain. He ordered the most expensive wine and demanded the filet medium rare to rare, as if testing the patience of whoever served him. Clara maintained politeness and her rehearsed smile, but inside she already felt the poison of those words dripping down her skin. He was the type of client who confused tips with permission to humiliate. When the dish arrived, exactly as he had ordered, Enrique made a point of rejecting it with irony. He threw the napkin on the table and questioned if she could read. He made jokes about her background, suggested she go back to the countryside. Some customers around fell silent. The laughter stopped, and Clara felt the anger transform into something deeper, a memory that demanded an answer. That voice, that dry tone full of superiority. Clara had heard all of that before, but it wasn't at the restaurant. It was in the cramped kitchen of the house where she grew up. While holding the tray against her chest, she went back in time, like someone opening an old album of memories that were never chosen. Enrique didn't know, but Clara was the daughter of Antonia, the woman who for more than a decade served his family with dedication and silence. Antonia washed, cooked, and smiled even when treated as invisible. And Henrique, still a teenager, already shouted through the hallways, imitating his father, as if it were natural to demand everything and thank for nothing. When Clara heard the offenses, she didn't just feel anger. She felt her mother's absence, the nights when she heard her crying softly behind the door. The same voice that humiliated her now was the one that echoed from the past. And it was at that exact moment that she realized the millionaire in front of her was the same spoiled boy her mother had served for years. Only now, the daughter of that maid had something he never had, a voice. Clara took a deep breath, adjusted her uniform, and walked to the table. She no longer trembled. She stopped in front of Henrique, and with the same calm her mother taught her, asked a simple question. "Is everything to your liking, sir?" He, surprised by the politeness after the scandal, barely had time to respond. And it was then that Clara broke the silence, but not with anger. She told him who she was. She said her mother's name, Antonia. She remembered the washed clothes, the rice with garlic without onion, the years of faithful service. She also remembered the day Antonia was fired for being sick. Henrique turned pale. The memory exploded in his mind like a broken mirror, reflecting everything he preferred to forget. But Clara didn't speak with resentment. She spoke with firmness. She spoke like someone who had swallowed too much silence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lower herself. She simply exposed the truth. The girl who grew up hearing his screams was now standing before him, serving with more dignity than he had ever learned to have. And there, in that moment, the power switched sides. The entire restaurant seemed to have stopped in time. Cutlery froze in the air, smiles disappeared, and even the background music seemed to vanish. Everyone was listening, even while pretending not to listen. The waitress who previously walked invisibly between tables was now the center of a truth that no one dared interrupt. Clara didn't use heavy words, nor did she get agitated, but her posture said everything. She spoke for all the times someone stayed quiet out of fear of losing their job, for every ignored employee, for every look that passed over as if the uniform erased humanity. Her voice was low, but her impact was deafening. Henrique, previously confident and loud, couldn't respond. His friends beside him looked away. Customers exchanged discreet glances. There was a new feeling in the air, respect. For the first time, Clara wasn't just the waitress. She was the daughter of the silenced maid who, with class and courage, returned dignity to her mother's name and showed that even those who serve can teach what character means. That night, Henrique left the restaurant without saying a word. For the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't from others. It was his. At home, he wandered through the rooms like someone looking for something but not knowing what. He stopped in front of an old wardrobe, opened a dusty photo album, and there she was, Antonia, in the background of a blurred image, with her white apron and attentive eyes. Her face came flooding back to memory, the smell of rice with garlic, the well-ironed sheets, the coffee ready at the right time. And with that came shame too. Not the shame of a momentary mistake, but of accumulated indifference, of never having asked even the full name of the woman who took care of everything in silence. Henrique finally realized that he wasn't just arrogant, he was the heir to a lack of respect that came from generations. And now, no matter how much money he had, there was no way to buy back the time he ignored those who served him. That memory, silent and firm, was stronger than any lesson he had ever learned, because it came from those he had always ignored. Days later, Clara was called by the manager. "There's a man waiting for you outside. He's alone." Upon leaving, she found Henrique, without a suit, without pose, just with a simple shirt and downcast eyes. He asked for a minute, with a voice very different from the last time, more contained, more human. Henrique took a deep breath and said he had thought a lot since that night, that he remembered Antonia, the silent dedication, the constant presence he never valued. He admitted he was arrogant, ungrateful, and that he learned through the pain of embarrassment what he didn't want to see for a lifetime. "You had every right to yell back at me," he confessed. But Clara didn't want money or compensation. She interrupted gently and said, "It's not about paying anything. It's about respect." What she wanted, he was finally offering: a real apology. And in that instant, without need for more words, Henrique understood, perhaps for the first time, what it means to listen with an open heart. Henrique didn't return to the restaurant with the same habits. The following week, he appeared again, this time simpler, more discreet. Before even sitting down, he asked the waiter for someone else to serve him instead of Clara. It was a subtle gesture, but full of consideration. Not out of shame, but out of respect. During dinner, he remained silent. Upon leaving, he left a double tip with a handwritten note. Gratitude can't be demanded, but when it blooms, it transforms everything around it. Clara read that with a lump in her throat. It wasn't the money, it was the change. Henrique was no longer the man who snapped his fingers. He was someone who was beginning to listen. His posture echoed the impact of the night he was silenced by a brave waitress. And curiously, without public speeches, without making a fuss, his attitude began to influence others. A gentle gesture here, a softer tone there. Gradually, the restaurant began to notice that even those who seemed unreachable could learn from the humility of those who were always invisible. Clara returned to her routine with the same professionalism as always, but something had changed. Customers began to look at her differently, not with pity, but with respect. Colleagues whispered less and listened more. She didn't place herself above anyone, but now everyone knew that her story carried more than noted orders. One afternoon, the manager called her to the office with a discreet smile. "We received contact from an institution offering a scholarship. They said it was a recommendation from an anonymous admirer." Clara was speechless. She didn't need much to understand where that gesture came from. It wasn't just support. It was recognition from someone who finally understood the value of what he had previously ignored. The news spread among the employees like a gentle breeze. Some colleagues hugged her, others just smiled from the corner. But what remained in the air was a rare sensation that someone had managed to change their own story without screaming, without fighting, just with the silent force of memory and dignity. Clara proved that emotional transformation begins when we position ourselves, even with a low voice. Clara's words that night weren't restricted to the restaurant. They echoed, not on social media nor in headlines, but in looks, in postures, in the way people began to treat those who were previously invisible. It was as if a silent code had been broken, that those who serve should only endure quietly. Customers who barely thanked before now made a point of looking into eyes. One of Henrique's friends, who witnessed the scene, was seen helping an elderly man pick up a handkerchief from the floor, something unthinkable before. It wasn't a spectacle, but a discreet change, like when light changes subtly and we only notice afterward. Clara continued with her work, without needing to boast. She knew that truth spoken with respect has its own power, and that sometimes the greatest impact comes not from the loudest voice, but from the firmest posture. What she said that night became memory, and like all true memory, it continued acting even after the dining room emptied. That night, Clara didn't win an argument. She conquered silence. She didn't need to get agitated, nor return offense with screaming. She simply remembered with firmness who she was and who her mother was. And by doing so, she silenced a man who was used to dominating spaces with his voice, not with character. Henrique left transformed, but who really stood up was Clara. She understood that posture and character don't come with surnames or bank accounts, but with courage. The girl from the kitchen grew up, and in that elegant dining room showed that dignity isn't bought with tips, it's earned with truth. And so, the daughter of the silenced maid became the woman who, with class and courage, taught an arrogant millionaire that respect isn't luxury, it's foundation. And when truth comes wrapped in memory and justice, it doesn't need a stage. It simply happens and transforms everything around it. How many times have you had to stay quiet to keep a job, a relationship, or simply peace? How many times have you swallowed words that deserved an answer but preferred to preserve your own dignity? Clara's story reminds us that there's a limit to silence, and that when it's broken with posture and truth, it transforms not only those who speak, but also those who listen. Maybe you're going through something similar. Maybe you've already encountered people who confuse humility with submission, but the truth is that courage isn't about screaming louder, but knowing the exact moment to speak with firmness, clarity, and memory. Because dignity isn't negotiated, it's affirmed. If this story touched you, if you've experienced something similar or know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video. Like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next stories. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been silenced at some point in your life, but chose to maintain your posture? Your account could inspire someone today.